This is Miss Deidre Pinder with another keyboarding nugget. Today, we are doing a business letter activity. Show of hands, who can list the parts of a business letter in the correct order? You are correct. The parts of a business letter are the date, inside address, salutation, body, complimentary close, writer's name and position, and the typist's initial. Good job. Provide an example of a salutation. I see your hands. An example of a salutation is, Dear Miss Pinder. Very good. What is the name of the part of the letter that comes after the date? Remember to show your hands. The part of the letter that comes after the date is the inside address. Very good. Where is the complimentary close located on a business letter? The complimentary close is located after the, let me hear you, body of the letter. Very good, kids. Where is the typist's initial positioned on a letter? Let's see who can answer this one. The typist's initial is placed after the writer's name and position. Excellent. Now for our last question, I need you to think. How is a business letter different from a personal business letter? Think about it very carefully. I see your hands. I see your hands, students. The business letter starts with the date. Excellent. Whereas the personal business letter starts with the return address. Excellent, students. All of your answers were correct. Business letters. It's that simple.
All right. So a very pleasant good morning to you. Those of you that are just coming in, come on in. We were waiting on you, excitedly waiting on you. All right. So welcome. And so I'm going to share my screen as I usually do with you. And today we're going to be talking about another question that the Pharisees had. All right. And I just want you to take a look at my screen. Take a look at my screen. And here's our question as we get into the lesson today. All right. What are some ways that we can rest? I know you've heard this word over and over and over again. And this word is associated with something that we hear all the time in the church. It's actually a part of the 10 Commandments. All right. So as we get into the lesson today, what are some ways? I want you to think about it. What are some ways do you think we as people, we as Christians, we as the body of Christ, just go ahead, click on your Q&A, whatever device that you're using. If it's a tablet, if it's your phone, if it's your laptop, there should be an icon there where it says Q&A. Click on that Q&A. Let Ms. Johnson know that you're paying attention and you want to be involved in what's happening in our lesson today. All right. So what are some ways we can rest? Very good, LaShawn. I see you. Welcome. I miss you, LaShawn. All right. Sleeping. We can rest. Good. Taking vacations. Lying down. I think when we, Miss Mather, Misha Mather, think when we dead, we resting. Wow. All right. Yes. All right. All right, Miss Walker. So good to see you again this morning. All right. It's about plucking corn. That's not resting though. All right. I want you to think about some ways that you could rest. All right. Reading the Bible, paying attention. All right. Not doing any work, sleep. Okay. When we die, when we say that's our final rest, when we die, praying. All right. Taking naps. All right. Very good. When we meditate, I think Mr. Smith was trying to tell me. All right. So I'm so glad that you are all. Yes, I can see your answers, Miss Amber. All right. I'm looking at the Q&A and I'm able to respond to you, relaxing. All right. Praying and fasting. And so all of you are on the right track. Whenever we think of ways we can rest, here's one way that I came up with right here. Some of you said reading the Bible. Okay, it can be reading a Bible, reading a book. Your mind is at ease. All right, you're resting. You may be reading, but you're actually resting. All right. Here's another way. Some of you said it already. You know, you just want to sit in the sun and you just want to lay out. You just want the sun to beat on you. Yes, relaxing. My favorite. Going on vacation. My favorite way of resting. All right, taking a vacation. Some of you said that. And I'm so glad that you all are really on the right track and you understand what it means to rest. All right. And then here we go, which is the most popular one that everyone will say. When a way we can rest is when we actually go to sleep. And so thank you so much for responding. And I want you to keep the momentum up because as we go through the lesson, then I want you to keep responding. Let Ms. Johnson know that you're understanding what's going on in our lesson today. And so for Ms. Walker and the rest of you who were able to tell me right off the top from you heard the word rest, your mind went automatically on the Sabbath. So whenever you hear the word Sabbath, or you hear the word rest, you know that rest is associated with the word Sabbath. So high five to you who were able to say it's going to be about the question on the Sabbath. All right, very good. And so, of course, those of you who do not know me and are just joining the class, I am Mrs. Lolita Johnson, and I am a teacher at C.H. Reeves, and I am a religious studies teacher, and it's my pleasure to be hosting this session and teaching this class for you today. And so today, we know that the Pharisees, we've met them already. We've met them when Jesus went to Levi's dinner. We met them in our last session with fasting, where they questioned Jesus and his disciples about fasting. And now today, they are going to play a pivotal role in our story today about the question about the Sabbath. All right? Good. All right. So here we go. As usual, these are some of the things that I would like you to know at the end of the lesson. The first thing is you're going to be able to tell me what the word Sabbath means. All right? So I really need you to pay attention today. And it's not going to be a long class. But guess what? I know you all like to be on this call with Miss Johnson, so it's okay. We can hang out for another 40 minutes or so, right? Good. All right. Secondly, we're going to be discussing the importance of the Sabbath day to the Jews. All right. The Jews, the Sabbath was very important for them. All right. And then we're going to explain the reason why the Pharisees were upset with Jesus' disciples picking corn on the Sabbath. So like I said, and I've been saying, this is review. So some of you would have already been familiar with this story. Some of you may not have remembered it. And so it's an awesome thing that you did to get up 9 a.m. this morning when you could have been sleeping to be in this virtual classroom with Miss Johnson to learn about the Sabbath. And then, of course, we're going to argue whether human needs are more important than religious laws. So let's get ready for that because I know some of you have a lot of things to say about that. And if I were in my classroom, I know that hands would have already been raised to tell me about the Sabbath. And we know that a lot of people, a lot of Christians in our country, we really don't take the Sabbath as serious as the Jews would have taken the Sabbath. Now, there is one religion that most of you know about that is very, really, really serious and very strict with the Sabbath. Now, if you know what that denomination is, all right, there's a denomination a lot of you may have been exposed to already. And if you know which denomination takes the Sabbath really serious, I want you to go right in the Q&A and let me know. All right? If you know which denomination, all right, in our country takes the Sabbath really serious. All right? Very good. All right. Seventh Day Adventists. Excellent. All right. Now we know that all the other denominations, the Baptists and the Pentecostals and the Anglicans and the Catholics, yes, they observe the Sabbath. Now, the Seventh Day Adventists, we know that they observe the Sabbath on Saturday. Most Christians, all right, observe the Sabbath on Sunday. And so there's always been a debate about whether the Sabbath is on a Saturday or whether the Sabbath is Sunday. However, if we go back in history, when Jesus created, let's go all the way back to the book of Genesis, and he talked about creation. And he said, on the seventh day, we must what? Rest from all of our labor. And so really, all right, and from what I've researched and what I've found out, the Sabbath is really, the seventh day of the week is really the Saturday. Now, don't judge Miss Johnson and don't throw rocks at me. However, when the Catholic Church came on, they decided that they would observe the Sabbath on the Sunday. All right? Now, so that's where Christianity and Christians observe the Sabbath on the Sunday. When the Seventh Day Adventists came along, they said, no, the Sabbath should be on a Saturday. And so that's where you have the two different denominations, and the different denominations observing the Sabbath on different days. All right? But we can't say that one is wrong and one is right. He said, Jesus said, work 6 and rest 1. All right? So our Sabbath day, whichever your Sabbath day is, please do not throw stones at the person and say, you're wrong because you worship on a Saturday. You're wrong because you worship on a Sunday. No, it's not about that. All right? It's about working. It's about taking a rest. And so if you choose your seventh day to be the Saturday, to observe your Sabbath on a Saturday, awesome. You observe your Sabbath on a Sunday, still awesome. Okay? Oh, good. All right. So our first vocabulary word is Sabbath. And I want you to look at your screen and I want you to read with me. So Sabbath means the seventh day of the Jewish week, which is a day of rest. And of course, that's what we started our lesson off with, talking about ways that we can rest. All right. And then our second vocabulary word for the day is holy. And holy means sacred, to set apart, or worthy of worship. And so whenever we look at the Sabbath day, we look at the Sabbath, we know that we're automatically thinking of it as being something that is sacred and holy before God. And that's why we try not to get involved with so much work, because on the Sabbath, you really shouldn't be doing any type of work. All right, we should refrain, stay away from any sort of work. Now, please don't go and tell your parents. Now, this is my disclaimer. Don't tell your parents, Miss Johnson, say that I mustn't do no work on my Sabbath. Or if they ask you to clean the dishes, you say, well, mommy or daddy or auntie, whoever, I am resting because this is my Sabbath and God tell me. No, that's not. Don't use Miss Johnson to do your housework. All right? Good. All right. And of course, our third vocabulary word is lawful. And lawful means to be allowed. All right. And we're going to see what role all of these words are going to play in our lesson today. All right. So the first thing I want us to do is we're going to read the scripture. And of course, this always helps us to understand our lesson a little bit more whenever we read. All right? So let's go ahead. And we're reading together. Jesus was walking through some wheat fields on the Sabbath. As his disciples walked along with him, they began to pick the heads of wheat. So the Pharisees said to Jesus, "Look, it is against our law for your disciples to do that on the Sabbath." So Jesus answered, "Have you never read what David did that time when he needed something to eat? He and his men were hungry. So he went into the house of God and he ate the bread offered to God. This happened when Abiathar was the high priest. According to our law, only the priest may eat this bread. But David ate it and even gave it to his men." And Jesus concluded by saying, "The Sabbath was made for the good of human beings. They were not made for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath." Now, I know you're going to say, Miss Johnson, what does all of that mean? The Sabbath was very, very important to the Jews. And so we know that the Jews were very, very strict about the law. And the Pharisees, they were the Jewish religious leaders, and they ensured that the law was carried out effectively and properly, and anyone who was breaking the law, they were on them, and in some cases they were even arrested for breaking the law, just like in our country. You know, if we break the law, like some of y'all trying to sneak out during the curfew, some of y'all trying to sneak out during the lockdown, you know, the law is that we are in 24-hour curfew and only come out the house if you're going to do essential work. But some of you are doing your own thing. And so, just like it is in our country today, and just like it was in the Jewish days, all right, the law was very important. And so, just like the Sabbath is important for the Seventh Day Adventists, and they're very strict about that. They're even strict about their diet. You know, the Seventh Day Adventist faith. If any of you are here are from that faith, then you know exactly what Miss Johnson is talking about. All right, they're very strict about their diet. They're very strict about the Sabbath. All right, and we didn't go into details about the Sabbath, but if you just look at the screen, all right, and you look at the PowerPoint, you see that something is going on in the picture. The sun is getting ready to do what? The sun is getting ready to set. All right, and so for the Seventh Day Adventists who observe the Sabbath very strictly, like the Jews, and the Jews still observe the Sabbath the same way, where on Friday at sundown, they turn in, they go in, all right, and they prepare themselves. The only thing that they do is they rest and they worship on their Saturday Sabbath, and then the Sabbath ends for them on when? You tell me. I've been doing all the talking. Y'all just sitting there looking and listening to Miss Johnson. Some of y'all use your fingers and type in there for Miss Johnson. All right. Please tell me, when does the Sabbath end? I told you when it started. So go ahead and tell me when the Sabbath ends. It starts on sundown. All right. It starts sundown on Friday. So when does it end? When does it end? All right. And I'm looking to see who's paying attention. All right. 6 o'clock, sunrise on Sunday, Sunday sunset. It ends on Saturday sunset. Very good, Mr. Renald Floridor. Please forgive me if I pronounce your name wrong. Very good. Cherish, Saturday sunset. Very good. Zahira, I see you. Chad Miller, I see you. It's not sunrise on Sunday, Chad, but however, it's sunset on Saturday. All right, Miss Major, I see you. All right, so for all of you who's saying Sunday morning, let's just make that little correction for Miss Johnson. And it begins on Friday at sundown. All right, or sunset, and some of your teachers, and I teach it as well, we teach sunset usually starts about 6 p.m. and then it goes for 24 hours. So it ends on Saturday at sunset, which we usually measure it around 6 p.m. All right. So now let's talk about why was the Sabbath important to the Jews. And the first one is here. The Jews keep Sabbath as their holy days. Remember, we talked about the word holy. And the word holy means something that is sacred. All right. Something that you would hold near and dear to you. And so the Sabbath for the Jews, they hold that very near to their heart. And so here it is. It begins sunset on Friday and ends sunset on Saturday. All right. So it's very important to the Jews. Another reason it's important because they keep the Sabbath as a day of rest. Because God rested on the seventh day after creation of the world. He blessed the Sabbath day and he commanded that it be kept holy. Now, many of us are guilty. Oh Lord, Miss Johnson have to repent because sometimes I usually observe my Sabbath on a Sunday, and sometimes I'm guilty of doing work and not resting as I should. All right, and I know I'm not alone. Miss Johnson ain't alone in this, right? All right, so we have to remember what Jesus said about the Sabbath. It's actually even one of our commandments. Anybody can tell me what the commandments say? All right, one of our commandments speaks specifically to the Sabbath. So go right in there, type in your Q&A for me. All right, type in your Q&A for me and tell me which commandment Jesus was talking about. Which commandment Jesus was talking about as it relates to the Sabbath. All right. And remember now, I can see your comments. So please feel free to type. Please feel free to type. All right. What does the commandment say? All right. All my Bible, all my Sunday school scholars, all my children's ministry scholars, teen ministry. I know a lot of you go to church. You're active in your church. What does that commandment say? Rest on the Sabbath day. We're talking about the commandment that deals with the Sabbath. All right. I want you to go research it. And before the end of the class, you'll be able to tell me exactly what it says. I can tell you, but I don't want to tell you. Just quickly look in the Bible, go pull up the 10 commandments, find it somewhere, and tell me exactly what the commandment says from God. All right. And we're moving on. So, you know, Miss Johnson just get a little carried away sometimes. This information is so good. All right. So the third reason why the Sabbath was important to the Jews, because in the Christian denomination, the Seventh Day Adventist worships on Saturday, which is the seventh day of the week. And Miss Johnson have been saying this all lesson. And most denominations, such as Baptist, Anglican, and Catholic, worship on Sunday, which is the first day of the week, because Jesus was resurrected on the first day of the week. All right. And so that's our reason why we have the Saturday and the Sunday. So really, like someone said earlier, and I read in the Q&A, none of them are wrong about worshiping the Sabbath. Good. So while Miss Johnson is talking, don't forget you're researching that commandment that deals with the Sabbath, and you're sticking it in the Q&A to let me know that you're really with me this morning as we talk about the Sabbath. All right. So now we want to just summarize this story a little bit. So here we go. Now, again, the Pharisees had an issue. All right. Now, how they just find Jesus and end up in the same places where Jesus is beyond me. You know, sometimes you have, like, you go someplace, and every time you go someplace, you just see this person, you be like, wow, every time. So here it is now, Jesus and his disciples minding their own business. All right. And they decided that they were going to take a walk through the cornfield. A lot of places that the Jews wanted to go more than 2,000 years ago when Jesus was alive, they didn't have the fancy cars and all that stuff that we have today. They went a lot of places on foot. And so this day was like no other. And this was a Sabbath day. And so on this Sabbath day, they decided that they were going to take the path through the cornfield. But something happened while they were going through the cornfield. All right? Something happened. Jesus and his disciples were approached again by the Pharisees on the way they acted. All right? Now, if you were on the last lesson, you would remember that I drew the illustration between the difference between the Pharisees and Jesus. Jesus represents Christianity and the new way of doing things, and the Pharisees represent the Jewish religion and the old way of doing things. And Jesus now came to do away with the old way, and that's why he's introducing the new way. So stay with me. All right. So the Pharisees now, because of who they are and what they represent, they told Jesus that it was wrong for his disciples to pick corn on the Sabbath. Now, before I go any further, I want you to think about, why do you think the Pharisees told Jesus that it was wrong for them to pick the corn on the Sabbath? Now, if you remember this lesson from your class, or you was really paying attention, why to our scripture reading, why do you think, and I'm looking for your responses, why do you think the Pharisees had a problem with them picking the corn on the Sabbath day? All right, good. And I see some of y'all did do the research, and I see Devontae Roll, remember to keep the Sabbath day holy. Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. Very good. It's a commandment by God. All right. The fourth commandment, remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. Be anchored, Jean Baptiste. I love you. You are my ideal student. You go above and beyond. All right. Awesome, awesome work. She told me the rich commandment, the fourth commandment, and she even gave details. Hats off to you. Here's my virtual high five for you, sweetheart, for doing such a superb job in finding that information. All right. Okay, so we know that the fourth commandment talks about the Sabbath, and Jesus said, remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. Now, some of you should be trying to put the answer in there, that why did the Pharisees told Jesus it was wrong for them to pick the corn? All right. Yes, it was the Sabbath day and they were picking the corn. But why? Very good. Because the Sabbath day is a day of rest. And as far as the Pharisees were concerned, if they were picking the corn, then they were actually doing work on the Sabbath. But now we're going to find out later on in the story that it didn't really have anything to do with work. It was because of another reason. So let's see if we can unfold what that next reason is. All right. And so according to the law, the disciples were allowed to do so. All right. They were allowed to pick corn. So it's actually, so Jesus was saying, really, it's wrong. It's not wrong what they were doing. All right. The disciples were allowed to do so. They were to do so there means to pick the corn. All right. The law said, if you enter your neighbor's cornfield, you may pick the corn ears with your hands, but you must not put a sickle to his standing corn. Now, I know some of you are trying to say, well, Miss Johnson, where you find that word from? I never hear about that word in my life. All right. I never hear but this word sickle. All right. Sickle. What does that word mean? Now, do I have any scholars in my room, in my class today? Can you go ahead and tell me what that word means? All right. You must not put a sickle to his standing corn. Anybody have any idea what they mean by that, or what Miss Johnson mean by saying that? All right. For those of you who do not know, all right, a sickle means, like if you get someone to come and clean your yard. All right. Those of you who have gardeners that come into your yard, whenever they come into your yard and they're trimming your bushes, what are they using? They're using a tool. And they're using, some of you call them shearers, some of you may call them a clipper, whatever you refer to them as. And so basically what I mean by saying don't put a sickle means that you don't use an actual tool. What they were using to pick the corn was actually their hand. And so because they were using their hand to pick the corn, according to the law, they were allowed to do so. But you weren't allowed to actually go and be, you would in the field, all right, and you're using that tool to go ahead and cut down the whatever it is you're doing in the field. That is considered the work. And so Jesus really stood up for his disciples. All right, he stood up for them. And he said, however, reaping was one of the things forbidden on the Sabbath. And that was what their disciples was accused of doing. They were accused of reaping, all right? And it was forbidden on the Sabbath. All right, you can hear me. Awesome. A sickle is a gardening tool. Very good. It's like a cutlass. All right? Yes. Awesome. All right. So some of you were really on and you understand exactly what Ms. Johnson was saying today. All right. Good. All right. Okay. Good. All right. And so Jesus defended the disciples. Jesus defended the disciples, and he said reaping was one of the things forbidden on the Sabbath, and that was what the disciples were accused of doing. Jesus didn't argue with the disciples. All right, he didn't argue what the disciples were doing. He was more concerned about the basic idea behind the law. And the law was there for the good of human beings and not to make their lives difficult. Now, I want you to look at the picture. And I want you to see, if you remember, when we read our story, all right, Jesus immediately answered the disciples and he said to them, look and see what David did. When David went into the temple, David saw the consecrated bread on the temple. It was only for the high priest, and the high priest at that time was Abiathar. All right, it was for the high priest. And Abiathar, the high priest, he ate the bread. David ate the showbread that was only for the high priest. All right. And so Jesus had to use that illustration to let the Pharisees know that he had to use that illustration to let the Pharisees know that what the disciples were doing in the cornfield that day was needful. All right. And he used that illustration to help them to understand that there are going to be some times when human needs are going to override the religious laws. And in this case, this was one of those times. And so Jesus didn't argue what the disciples were doing. He was concerned about the basic idea behind the law. And the law was there for the good of human beings, but not to make their lives difficult. Now, we know sometimes in life that some laws are going to be made that makes our lives difficult. For some of you, the law that the government is putting in place, the amendment to the law that he's putting in place due to COVID-19 is making your lives miserable. And you feel like sometimes the prime minister is so unfair because I want to go out. I want to go on the park. I want to go to the beach. I want to socialize with my friends. And so it's really difficult. All right. But the law was not made to make your life difficult. This law that was put in place for the prime minister was really put in place to protect you and to keep you safe. All right. And so Jesus now was saying that the law was not made difficult. The disciples were hungry, so they plucked the corn. That's human needs. And sometimes you're going to need some things that's going to override the law. But the law was not put in to make your life difficult. And that's the point that Jesus was trying to make to the Pharisees. And so Jesus reminded the Pharisees about the occasion when David and his men ate the high priest Abiathar's showbread because they were hungry. All right. And that's all Miss Johnson was trying to say. All right. So according to the Jewish law, only the priest was allowed to eat this bread. If David and his men were able to break a religious tradition because they had a need, then the disciples of Jesus could do a little work on the Sabbath since they were hungry. Since you say that they went into the cornfield, they plucked the corn and they ate the corn because they were hungry, and they ate the corn, and you consider that work, then Jesus saying, cut them some slack. All right? Cut them a little slack. They had a need. And by plucking the corn, they were meeting that human need. And he's saying, which is a little bit above what the law says about the Sabbath and work. And so he had shown the Pharisees that the law was for the benefit of the human race. Don't we need food to survive? Some of you, are home, and when you get hungry, and if you go into the kitchen and there's nothing, you're going to cry out to your parents and said, I am hungry. I need something to eat. That's a need. All right? That's a need. And in our story today, the disciples had a need. And that need was what? That they were hungry. All right? And so Jesus had shown the Pharisees that the law was for the benefit of the human race. And the Sabbath was made for man and not man for the Sabbath. All right? Remember those words. Say it with me. Read it with me. The Sabbath was made for man and not man for the Sabbath. Well, Miss Johnson, I hear you. But what does that mean? Explain it to me so that I can understand. I'm glad you asked me that question. It was made, that means the Sabbath was made for man to enjoy. All right? Remember, when we began our lesson and we talked about ways that we can rest, it's important for you to relax. It's important for you to sleep. We won't be able to function if we don't sleep. You won't be able to stay up in this lesson with Miss Johnson if you didn't have a good sleep last night. And so the human body, we have needs. And a part of that need is making sure that we feed it. We eat some food. In our story today, that's what we're talking about. And so it was made for man to enjoy. And human needs are more important than religious laws. So anytime you hear them say, or you see the question, or if the question comes up in your exam and you say, and it says explain or tell me what it means. What does it mean? The Sabbath was made for man and not man for the Sabbath. Your reply or your explanation is going to be, that means the Sabbath was made for man to enjoy. And human needs are more important than religious laws. In cases of urgency, breaking the sabbatical law is not wrong. And basically, to sum it all up, that's what Jesus was really saying. A need had to be met. All right. And then if you read the King James Version, it will say what is needful is lawful. It means the same thing. This version of the Bible that we just read from, or this quote, just came from the Good News Version. But the King James Version is going to say what is needful is lawful. It means the same thing. That man was made, that the Sabbath was made for humans to enjoy it, and it was more important than religious laws. So either quote you see, it means the same thing. All right. Now, I hope you didn't get lost, and I hope you enjoyed this lesson. And boy, our time just always run away from Miss Johnson. Now, this is your time now, for I'm going to be quiet, and you're going to do the virtual talking. What do I mean by virtual talking? You're going to type in the responses just to let me know that you understood what we talked about today and you were on target. All right? So the first thing I want someone to do for Miss Johnson real quick is to find the word Sabbath. Quickly put it in your Q&A, and I'm looking, and I'm back up. Go ahead and put in your Q&A. Put in your Q&A for me. What does the word Sabbath means? All right. And before my computer shut out just now, I was welcoming Miss Penniman, who is here with us, and she'd be happy to assist us and in responding to ensure that your answers are correct. Okay, very good. Some of you are really paying attention. The seventh day of the week, it's a day of rest. Very good. I'm so glad you're paying attention. Thank you so much. All right. Now, unfortunately, I can't answer you live, but I want you to know that I'm reading your responses and I see that you're right on with your answers. Mr. Russell, I see you. A day of rest. Just remember, let's remember to say it's also the seventh day of the week. Next question. Now, this is your time to respond. Give 2 reasons why the Sabbath was important to the Jews. Easy. Come on. Come on. Put those answers in there. Why was the Sabbath important to the Jews? All right. Why was the Sabbath so important to the Jews? Just give me 2. I gave you 3. You give me 2. All right. Awesome. Go ahead. Put your answers in there. All right. Go ahead and put your answers in there. And then, why did the Pharisees get upset with Jesus's disciples? So what I want you to do, because there's so many of you on this call this morning, and thank you so much for getting up early and being in this class with Miss Johnson. Why did the Pharisees get upset with Jesus' disciples? So you choose one of these and put your answer in. So you choose one. If I'm going too fast, because of course we on a time limit, and I don't mean to rush you, but this is just a little recap to make sure that you were paying attention in the lesson today. All right. And lastly, what was Jesus' response to the Pharisees? Now, I just finished saying that. What was their response to the Pharisees? All right. Go ahead and type it in there. All right. I know some of you are so excited because finally I'm able to understand this topic. Maybe it wasn't as clear when you would have heard it the first time, but hearing it for a second time, it may have become a little clearer for you. And now you're able to get your A in your assignment. You're able to get your A for your BJC. And Miss Johnson is going to be so proud of all of you that are really participating and sharing your answers with me this morning. All right. So go ahead, choose any question, put your answer in there so I can make sure give you a shout out in our next lesson, which is on Thursday at 10 a.m. So please share the word. Let other ninth graders know who've been slunking, who've not been participating in any class sessions. Let them know. Get up early. Give them a call. Give them a wake-up call. Let them come in on the class. Now, those of you who asked about marking your assignments, I've been instructing you to please get in contact with your religious studies teacher at your respective schools, wherever you are, and let them know that you've been participating in the virtual learning on the Ministry of Education website. And here's your assignment if they can kindly assist you with marking the assignment for you. All right. And so I want to send you all to the link that is on the Ministry of Education website to go ahead and you can download your notes. You can download the assignment and get your work done. It can only help you. All right. Thank you all so much for being on the call. And as usual, I always put the assignment up here for those of you who may not be able to download the assignment because you might be using a phone or a tablet. You may not have sufficient space, but here are your questions, and I want you to answer them in complete sentences. Remember to put your name, to put your school, to put your island, and I want you to go ahead and answer them. Remember our scripture, Mark chapter 2 and verse 23 to 28. For some of you who may have logged on late, you can also use that. You can also use that to help you, all right, to answer the questions. And here is your JPR. We do have a JPR again today, students. Remember, you can never get too much practice. So go ahead. Those of you that are writing, go ahead. You're going to write down these questions for me, and you're going to submit them into your religious studies teacher. I'm going to give you, we're just about out of time, and I'm so sorry. I really hope you enjoyed this lesson today, and I look forward to seeing you in our next session, which is Thursday morning at 10 a.m. Have a beautiful and wonderful day.